Have you ever wondered what inflation really is and how it affects your everyday life? Now, this isn't just some abstract economic concept that only Wall Street insiders need to worry about. No, it's far more immediate, far more personal. It's about the price of bread at your local store, the cost of your next vacation, even the value of your hard-earned savings. It's everywhere, shaping your life in ways you might not realize. In this video, we will unravel the mystery of inflation, its causes and effects. Inflation as an economic term might sound intimidating, but in reality, it's something we deal with daily. Imagine you have a favorite chocolate bar that you buy regularly. One year, it costs $1, but the next, it's $1.10. The chocolate bar hasn't changed, but the price has. That's inflation in a nutshell. Inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services is rising, and subsequently, purchasing power is falling. It's like an invisible force that gradually erodes the value of money over time. So, while you're still holding the same dollar bill, it doesn't stretch as far as it used to. In the grand scheme of things, inflation reflects the health of an economy. Moderate inflation is often seen as a sign of a growing economy. However, too much or too little can cause problems. So when you notice that your favorite chocolate bar costs more than it did last year, that's inflation in action. Now that we know what inflation is, let's dive into why it happens. The causes of inflation are manifold, but can be broadly categorized into two types: demand pull and cost push inflation. Demand pull inflation occurs when demand for goods and services exceeds their supply. Imagine a hot new smartphone hits the market and everyone wants one. If there aren't enough phones to go around, the price goes up. That's demand pull inflation in action. On the other hand, cost push inflation happens when the cost of producing goods and services increases. For instance, if the price of oil skyrockets, it becomes more expensive to transport goods. This cost is then passed on to consumers through higher prices, leading to inflation. Now let's talk about the role of the key interest rate. Central banks use this rate to control inflation. When they foresee inflation rising, they increase the key interest rate. This makes borrowing more expensive, which slows down spending and cools off the economy, thus curbing inflation. Conversely, if the economy needs a boost, they lower the rate to encourage spending. Yet Japan's experience shows us that this tactic doesn't always work. Despite lowering the key interest rate to zero and even below, Japan is still struggling with low inflation rates. Another key factor in inflation is the speed of money circulation. The faster money changes hands, the more goods and services are demanded, which can push up prices. Here's a simple example to illustrate this. If you get a bonus at work and decide to splurge on a fancy dinner, that's more money circulating in the economy. If everyone does this at the same time, restaurants might hike up their prices due to the sudden surge in demand. Lastly, some argue that adopting a gold standard or similar could control inflation. Under this system, the value of currency is tied to a specific amount of gold. This makes it harder for governments to print money recklessly, which can lead to inflation. Inflation is a complex phenomenon with multiple causes, but the key interest rate and the speed of money circulation play significant roles. Inflation doesn't just make your chocolate bar more expensive, it has wider implications. At its core, inflation erodes your purchasing power. What does this mean? Well, imagine having $100 today. Over time, as inflation rises, the value of that $100 diminishes. You're still holding a $100 bill, but it just doesn't buy as much as it used to. This is the erosion of purchasing power, a direct effect of inflation. But that's not all. On a broader scale, inflation can lead to economic instability if left unchecked. It can create a vicious cycle. As prices increase, people tend to demand higher wages to maintain their standard of living. Businesses then increase prices to cover higher wage costs, leading to even more inflation. This is often referred to as wage price spiral, a situation that can severely destabilize an economy. From our previous discussion, we know that inflation can be a normal part of economic growth. But what happens when it goes to the extreme? That's called hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is a term used to describe rapid, excessive, and often out-of-control general price increases in an economy. While inflation is a measure of the pace of rising prices for goods and services, hyperinflation is rapidly rising inflation, typically measuring more than 50% per month. Remember the chocolate bar from our earlier example? Now imagine its price doubling or even tripling within a month. That's the reality of hyperinflation. Now, let's look at some examples of countries that have experienced hyperinflation. Zimbabwe in the late 2000s is a prime example. At its peak, Zimbabwe's inflation reached an almost incomprehensible 89.7 sextillion% per month. The impact was devastating. It eroded savings, made the local currency worthless, and led to widespread poverty and unemployment. So, what causes hyperinflation? It usually occurs when there's a large increase in the money supply that's not supported by economic growth. This can happen during periods of war, severe economic crises, or when a government decides to print money to pay off its debts. But the effects of hyperinflation are even more dire. It erodes purchasing power even faster than regular inflation. Savings become worthless, the cost of goods and services skyrockets, and people's standard of living can be severely affected. In essence, hyperinflation is a severe and extreme form of inflation that can have devastating effects on an economy and its people. Hyperinflation, as we've discussed, can be a scary prospect, but fortunately there are ways to stop it and protect your wealth during such times. The first line of defense against hyperinflation is typically the central bank of a country. Central banks can use monetary policy to control hyperinflation. This can include raising interest rates to reduce the amount of money in circulation, or even introducing a new currency. Imagine the central bank as a captain steering the ship of the economy, trying to navigate through the stormy seas of hyperinflation. But what about individuals? How can you protect your wealth during periods of hyperinflation? One strategy is to invest in assets that retain or increase in value during hyperinflation. This could include commodities like gold or foreign currencies that are more stable. Think of this as building a financial lifeboat to keep you afloat when the economic waters get rough. While hyperinflation is indeed challenging, understanding these strategies can help you navigate such economic turbulence. What can we do about normal inflation? Let's look at Japan's experience. Japan, the third largest economy in the world, offers a unique perspective on inflation control. For years, Japan grappled with low inflation rates despite various attempts to stimulate economic activity. One such strategy was lowering the key interest rate, which is the interest rate that central banks set to influence economic growth. In a bid to spark inflation, Japan's central bank lowered this key interest rate to zero and even ventured into negative territory. The idea was simple: make borrowing so cheap that businesses and consumers would be encouraged to spend more, thereby stimulating economic activity and causing prices to rise. But here's the kicker: it didn't work. Why? The answer lies in an economic concept known as the velocity of money, which refers to the speed at which money changes hands. It's a bit like a game of hot potato. If no one's passing the potato, the game grinds to a halt. Similarly, if people aren't spending money, the economic activity slows down, regardless of how low interest rates are. So, if manipulating interest rates isn't a silver bullet, what else can be done? Some argue for a return to the gold standard, where a country's currency is directly linked to gold. This could theoretically limit the amount of money that can be created, hence controlling inflation. However, we cannot forget that inflation isn't just an economic issue, it's also a political one. Politicians are often faced with the balancing act of maintaining economic growth while keeping inflation under control. Politicians favor inflation because it reduces the real value of the debt they have to repay. On the other hand, coping with inflation can involve strategies to reduce demand or increase supply. These strategies can range from monetary policies, like adjusting interest rates, to fiscal policies, like reducing government spending or increasing taxes to destroy demand. But remember, these strategies can have their own trade-offs and consequences. Understanding the political implications and coping strategies can help us navigate the complexities of inflation. It gives us a broader perspective, allowing us to see beyond numbers and grasp the real-world implications. So, next time you hear about inflation rates in the news, remember, it's not just about economics. It's also about politics, strategies, and the world we live in. Inflation is a complex economic concept, but it's a part of our everyday life. We've explored its very essence, delved into its causes, and unpacked its effects. We've seen how interest rates and circulation speed can influence it, and how even attempts to induce inflation, like Japan's zero interest rate, can falter. We've considered alternative measures like a gold standard. With a better understanding of inflation, we can make more informed decisions and navigate the economic landscape more effectively. Thanks for watching.